On behalf of Tarlings, Peshus, the Rabbanim, and Rosh Yeshiva, it's a great pleasure and schus to welcome everybody to this Terhoi Ben Maimid. On behalf of Tarlings, I want to thank the organizers, Rabbi Safir, who reached out first, as well as Rav Szimanowitz, who gave Tarlings the schus to host this incredible Maimid. Just want to share that it's highly appropriate, I feel, I don't think I'm overstepping my bounds by saying this, that when so much of what goes on in this building is in consonance with so much of the Torah and Hashkafa of Rav Meir Simcha, just to read one line on Kedoshim Tiyu, Rav Meir Simcha writes, that the definition, Ikar Shem HaKadosh, is that when a person is Meiser HaKol Hashem Yisbarach Gufay, La'avdoi L'yiroi, Levavi V'sichel L'avai, Avadav Uvnei Vesav Yuadav, L'karvim L'avodas Hashem Yisbarach. The definition of Kedoshim Tiyu is that everything culminates eventually in being Mekarv, not only your Bnei Beis, but the people that you know, and that's certainly what we endeavor to do here on a daily basis, year-round. We should have this chus to be able to continue to do that, and to be able to be marbek for Shemayim. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for asking us to host.
Bruchim Aboim, B'Shem Hashem. First of all, I want to thank the Rabbi Shalom for granting us the schus to organize such an event, L'Kvod HaTorah, L'Kvod HaTzadik. Poisem L'Kvod HaChsanya, we thank Torah Links for so graciously allowing us to use this venue. This evening was the brainchild of two individuals, Rab David Safir and Rab Moshe Dembitzer. Their groundbreaking research and beautiful article about Rav Meir Simcha clearly demonstrate the connection that they feel and have to this great Gadol and his Torah. It was my schus that they asked Machon Aleh Zayis direct the event, and with the help of a dedicated staff and the support of Rab David Safir and Rab Tzvi Tres, individuals who are davik b'leiv nefesh in the Torah and the personage of Rav Meir Simcha, we are Baruch Hashem also able to have this rich program. May this be a schus for them and their families. A special thanks is due to the Gedolei Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbanim, who at great personal sacrifice agreed to come tonight and enrich us with all they know about the life and Torah. Not all they know, but a lot that they know, the life and Torah of the Ohr Somayach. May Hashem grant them gesund and arichas yomim v'shonim, should be zoiche l'kaim banu chachmi Yisrael. Rabbeinu HaKohen HaGadol Moron Rav Meir Simcha ben Rav Shimshon Kloinimis is best known by his two svarim, Ohr Somayach and Meshech Chochmah. But if you read his Matzeva, you'll see that he wrote more than that. On the Matzeva of Rav Meir Simcha, it says, Yosef al kisei Rabbanus b'Ireinu Dvinsk. He sat on the seat of the Rabbanus in Dvinsk. V'hichya isanu B'tal shel tchia, tal shana. It's a play on words that he was there 39 years. He was the Rav in Dvinsk. Chiber sforim nefloyim, sifri Ohr Somayach, kol chelkei Rambam, v'sefer Meshech Chochmah ala Torah. But then another line is added. Levad shehiniach achrav broche b'kisvei. He also left over handwritten manuscripts that were yet to be published at the time of his petirah, or even ready to be published, which was b'ksav yad. Yesterday was the Yahrzeit of the Riverdale Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Rambam Ozban Zicharon Levracha. Just a few weeks before his petirah, I was zoich to have a very interesting conversation with Rabbi Rambam. During that conversation, I asked him, how did he come to publish the Tshuvas Ohr Somayach? Something very atypical for Rosh Yeshiva of his caliber to engage in such a project. Where did it come to him that he did something like that? So he told me that when he was in New York, being oisig in Shidduchim, he went to libraries in New York to search for ksavim that might have survived the war from the Tel Zeroshi Yeshiva and Rabbanim. During that search, he was in the Yivo library, and over there, they gave him a whole box of ksavim. He opened it up and started reading piece after piece, and he recognized that one shtickle was verbatim a piece from the Ohr Somayach. Rabbi Remmel told me that he always had a very big non-kite to the Meshech Chochmah. Every Shabbos, he would come to shul with the Meshech Chochmah next to his siddur. That was his accompaniment the whole Shabbos. He seemed to have mastered the entire sefer Meshech Chochmah. And he mamish knew Ohr Somayach very klar. And here he sees a piece that looks exactly word for word of Ohr Somayach. But he wanted to be sure. So he went to the telephone in Yivo and he called his friend, Lahav L'chaim, Reb Kalman Epstein Shlita. And he said, do me a favor, look up the Ohr Somayach there and there, and read to me what it says over there. And sure enough, it was exactly, vort by vort, what he found in these ksavim. So he knew from there that this must be the ksavim of Rav Meir Simcha, HaKohen of Dvinsk. From there, Rabbi Remmel went on to publish the Chidusha Bein Rav Meir Simcha on Psachim and Sukkah, and later on he published the Tshuvas. In his Hakdama, the Chidush Rav Meir Simcha on Psachim and Sukkah, Rabbi Remmel signs off his Chasima, Dalid Elul, Tovshin Lamed Vav, Limalois Chamishim Shana Listalkus Moron Zatzal. It was exactly 50 years before tonight, exactly 50 years since the passing of Rav Meir Simcha, that he published this Sefer. But he writes another thing in that same Hakdama. He writes that he has been preceded with his work by somebody else. He acknowledged that 10 years earlier in Tovshin Chav Zayin, Rabbi Yehuda David Greenwald had published great portions of Chidush Rabbeinu Meir Simcha. Rabbi David Greenwald was the first and the most significant publisher of Rabbi Meir Simcha's ksavim. When these ksavim still lay in manuscript, he took upon himself the labor of bringing them to print, and for close to 60 years, Lomdim have been learning Rabbi Meir Simcha's Chidushim through his efforts. Rav Osban's own efforts were following that what Rabbi Yehuda David Greenwald did on his own. It is a great schus to acknowledge the presence of Rav David Greenwald here tonight. Right over there, he trekked all the way from the mountains to be able to participate in the Maimid L'chvoidoi Shal Rav Meir Simcha. Finally, I wish to thank all of those who came to participate in person, as well as those joining through hookup. One of my earliest memories of the Meshech Chochmah is a piece which my father showed me years ago. It's actually more than just a piece. It's a theme to which Rav Meir Simcha returns to many times in Meshech Chochmah, and again in his famous letter regarding Eretz Yisrael. Rav Meir Simcha says that the nationhood of Klal Yisrael is unlike every other nation. What welds or melds other peoples into a united nation is their common geographic location and their physical connection and interaction with one another. Not so the Bnei Yisrael. To quote the Lashon of Rav Meir Simcha, Kol Yisrael heim kavim nifrodim hamegim lemerkaz echad. Hu Hashem Yisborach ulesibas zeh heim kshurim yachdav. Each individual in Klal Yisrael is like a separate line reaching towards one central point, which is Hashem Yisborach, and it is He, meaning the Rebbeinu Shloim, who connects them to one another. He says this in Pashas Emor, then again in Pashas Voschanon, Nitzavim, and he develops it elsewhere as well. There are thousands of Yidden throughout the world who feel connected to Rav Meir Simcha and his Torah. In a sense, he, or rather his Torah, is the center point uniting all of us. But perhaps it's appropriate once in a yovel to unite physically as well, to deepen our bond with this Gadol, while also strengthening the bond of our fellow travelers through his Torah works. Many years ago, at a Torah Masorah convention, Rav Ruderman, in an effort to underscore the importance of distancing Talmidim from bad influence, he mentioned that while he was a Bachar in Slobodki Yeshiva, he roomed with another Bachar who, although was very good in learning, the Alt of Slobodka felt could be a bad influence on Rav Ruderman, the younger Rav Ruderman. In order to prevent this bad hashpah, the Alter moved Rav Ruderman into a dinky room in his own house. After Rav Ruderman's drasha, a then very young Rav Geldwerth, but already a master mechanech, approached Rav Ruderman in private and continued discussing the story with him, displaying what seemed like first-hand knowledge of events that transpired decades earlier in Slobodka. Rav Ruderman, who at the time was already a fnel to the Yarden, and he was nearly a saginor, started straining his eyes to make out who was this man who can still remember Rav Ruderman's teenage years in Slobodka. Rav Geldwerth assured him that he was only a young man, but that he happened to know the details of the event. In the meantime, the Rosh Yeshivas Rav Kotler joined the conversation, and the three men continued reminiscing about bygone years. Only Rav Lipa Geldwerth is capable of conversing about the past on almost equal footing with people who actually lived through it. The truth is that although Rav Geldwerth was not around in pre-war Europe, his extraordinary Shimush Talmidei Chachamim has given him the wisdom and knowledge as if he has been present. Starting from my years as a Bach and Tertmima, and again in recent years, I've been zoiche to generously draw from the deep waters of knowledge stored in Rav Lipa Geldwerth's infallible memory. My own life has been immensely enriched by his Messiahs. We are obligated by the Torah, Sh'alavicha v'yageitcha zikenecha v'yoimru lach. The correct address for that inquiry is a zokein shekana chochmah. Not from professional historians, but we learn from the past. To learn from the past, we turn to Gedolei HaTorah. It is therefore highly appropriate to ask Mori Rabbi Rav Lipa Geldwerth, who is here tonight at great personal sacrifice, to share divrei zikaron aracha about the Gaon HaDoros, Rabban Shekol Yisrael, Rav Meir Simcha HaKohen.
Rabbi say, now that Rabbi Szimanowitz made me 150 years old, I'll be excused for anything I forget to say. B'reshus Rabbanim Agonim, B'reshus Reb David Greenwald Shlita, who was so enriched the last 50 years, more, 60 years of everyone's life. B'reshus the Kal Nichbad, I just hope that I'm looking at an unusual gathering of people, and it seems to me these are people who know a great deal about Rav Meir Simcha, and I have very little to tell them. So I apologize if I'm just putting a few things together that might refresh some people's memories, maybe an extra ha'ara or two. And for the people who are not familiar with Rav Meir Simcha, then 25, 30 minutes certainly can't even scrape the surface. I once heard from HaKohen, Rab Tuvia Goldstein, Zech Tzadik Levracha, that he heard from Rabbi Chanan that Rabbi Chanan said over what he heard from the Chavetz Chaim, which the Chavetz Chaim heard Miziknei Vilna. And that was, ki yedua, that at some point, Rab Kiva Eger was maspid the Vilna Gaon. There's an introduction to that time doesn't allow. Rab Kiva Eger at first was reticent, but then he eventually did. What was the hesped? So Rab Tuvia shared what he had heard from Rabbi Chanan. What's the taich of a gadol hador? A gadol hador is someone who, when he passes on, he has closed and sealed that tekufa. Lo yhaniach k'moisai. Perhaps it's like a geder. I I don't remember if he said it or not, but Yamas Yosef, Chalecha v'chol adar hahu. With the petirah of Yosef HaTzadik, they could be the petirah of the entire dar. At the geschlossen, I think that was Lashon, at the geschlossen dem dar. When the Oib hat geschlossen dem dar, is a gewend the Gadol HaDor. There's something unique in Rav Meir Simcha that sealed a certain level. We talk in terms of godless very often. Goines, Charifis, Bekiyas, Yediyas, Chiddush. And some people assume that it's a mathematical thing, that a Gadol is the sum of his parts. And I think that the taich of Emes Adam Gadol is that he's greater than the sum of his parts. There's something that it's just more. It's not 2 times what we know to be God. It's a different thing. In the Chidush Rav Meir Simcha that Taka Reb David soll sein gesund published, there's an extraordinary hesped that's cited from one of the Talmidim of Rav Meir Simcha that I think depicts the uniqueness of Rav Meir Simcha. I remember when I was a child, my father, Zikaron Avracha, who was exceptional Talmid Chacham, he loved the Meshech Chochmah. And I remember him once closing the sefer and said to himself, but rather loud, Goyen's Cheder, the Goyen's Cheder. I think that it's not just an expression. Was meint zu sein dem Goyen's Cheder? The Gemara says in Moed Katan, Nosim leilis kiyamim al misha meisim leilis kiyamim. That was said, the Saptana said it for Ravina. Was it that analogy? Nosim leilis kiyamim, meisim leilis kiyamim. So steht in Medrash, various Midrashim, there they bring the Sheichetayv, the Tanchuma brings it. How did Moshe Rabbeinu know when it was day or night? Moshe Rabbeinu is Lamala. Steht in Medrash that when Moshe Rabbeinu was being taught Torah Shebiksav, he knew it was Yom. When he was taught Torah Shebal Peh, he knew it was Laila. Which means that Torah Shebiksav is Bebechinas Yom for its Behiris, and Torah Shebal Peh is Bebechinas Laila because of its obscurity. Nosim Leilois, what did Ravina do? Ravina took Torah Shebal Peh and he turned it kaviyachal into Torah Shebiksav. He gave it a certain behiris that in Torah Shebal Peh you didn't have. Rav Meir Simcha said these words in his hesped on the Malbim. Rav Meir Simcha, as we'll come to in a moment, was extraordinarily taken by the Malbim. And he said the Malbim achieved, and that's the Derech HaGra, of showing Torah Shebal Peh in the Torah Shebiksav. The Pas HaShulchan brings in the Sulam, Eliyahu, they bring in the Hagos there, that the Pas HaShulchan said that the Derech of the Goyen was to show in ganz Mishnayos that every Mishnah is in a Pasuk, and particularly in Ovis. That the Hashlama, the Shleimus HaTorah of Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebiksav, that was the work, said Rav Meir Simcha, of the Malbim as well. In Memela Nosim Leilos Kayamim, let us give Leilos Kayamim Amisha Mesim Leilos Kayamim, the one who made Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebiksav. And this Maspid said this on Rav Meir Simcha as well. Yedidi Rabbi Levitan, Zayn Gesund, pointed out to me that the ahava for the limud of the Malbim, Rav Meir Simcha had when he was asked once why he doesn't write something on Hilchas Deis, he said the Malbim hat schon geschrieben. In other words, and this goes very, very well with the phenomenon. I think people are aware that something that shouldn't have happened, happened, that if you'll take a look in Sefer Dvarim, in the Malbim, Sefer Dvarim, Perek Chav Beis, Pasuk Chav Beis, in tiny print, which should have been in Kiddush Levana Isius, the printers write that they haven't found any real ksavim anymore of the Malbim. Malbim was nifta. And they are fashioning the rest of the Sefer according to what they think is the Derech HaMalbim. The print is so small that you could learn Malbim many, many times and not notice it. And the reason I came across it is because my father's Chaim Avracha had a kasha on a Malbim that came after that didn't sound like a person like the Malbim could say it. I asked my Rebbe, Gaon Reb Shlomo Fisher, Yahrzeit almost 50 years ago, I asked him, was ist Pshat in them? He said, ihr wollt wissen Pshat. And he pulled out a Meshech Chochmah. Because at the very same Pasuk, on Perek Chav Beis, Pasuk Chav Beis, Zokt the Meshech Chochmah, from here on in, I will continue not on my derech, but derech ha-Torah va-mitzvah. In other words, all of a sudden, he's becoming the Malbim. And he theorized, and it makes sense, that to be mashlim, the avla that was done, that people decided they're going to finish the Malbim and not tell us that it's kimat in tiny print. Rav Meir Simcha hat sich genommen zu der Arbeit. That was Rav Meir Simcha's ahada for the Malbim. And it's not just the Malbim as the person. That's that derech of being mashlim kol Torah kula, to show that Torah shebiksav is Torah shebal peh. Together. Rav Meir Simcha, when you start to take apart those sum of the parts, the lumdis, that lumdis is in the category of Rab Chaim Brisker and Rab Yitzchak Panovitcher. The Bikiyas in the Lashon that the Kamana writes on the Gra, Leiv Mavel B'Shnei Talmudim. The Bikiyas is the Bikiyas of the Rogatchover and Rabbi Yosef Yankel. The Pshuto Shel Mikra, das ist the Pshuto Shel Mikra of the Ksava, Kabbalah, and the Malbim. Remez, Zal Derech HaGra. Drush, Meshpiat Yaris Dvash. Machshava, Maral, Sefer Ikrim. Machshava, original machshava that very few people can just say it. Chsam Sefer. If I could add a nakuda, which is totally subjective, but you never heard on most gedolim when they say a chiddush, you ask, "Wann nimmt das? Wem bringt er?" You don't ask that question on the Rizal. The Rizal zogt, nicht bringt. We don't ask that question on the Goyen. We don't ask that question on the Chsam Sefer. Chsam Sefer, wann nimmt der Chsam Sefer? Wann nimmt der Goyen? Sie sagen. They're the Mocker. They sagen. Rav Meir Simcha has attached himself to the Chsam Sefer in that, zogt, Rav Meir Simcha zogt. And we'll come to that in a moment. And in Kabbalah, there he's Megala Tefach and Mechaset Tefchaim. But it's clear. And das alles in Meshech Chochmah, as we're going to hear from the Rosh Yeshivas saying, das alles in the Kitzel Shoinoi that he was very mechaviv Kitzel Lashon, as he said. The Yigia of Rav Meir Simcha is world famous. For years, there are many stories of when people came to Bialystok. Rav Shmuel used to tell it over. People used to point This is where he sat. This is where that hasmada took place. It's like Evan Sheyashav of Moshe Rabbeinu. That mokem. 18 years, 18 hours a day. I want to share something. This story has been printed recently. Sein Gesund, a marvelous article that was quoted before, Dovi Safir and Moshe Dembitzer. But in other places as well, it comes in different forms. I'll share it with you how I heard it from my Rabbi. My Rabbi, Zech Tzaddik Levracha, Rab Shmuel Auerbach, told me that Rab Lezer Plechensky, who was a Dvinsk, told him that when he was a young boy, he came in and he was attending to the Rav Meir Simcha, who was already very, very schwach. He was lying in bed, and he asked him a question, to which he answered, I have that in one of my heftlach, and he pointed to a shelf. It was a pile of notebooks. And he told him which notebook, and I think he said which page. I asked Akasha, look it up. While this was taking place, again, this story appears in different versions, but this is what I heard. And it's cliche nidig. There was a knock on the door, and there was a woman who had a shaila on a chicken. And the way he told it to me was Rav Meir Simcha crawled out of bed with his kaldra, with his blanket, and schlepped himself to the door. And as he was walking, there was a Gemara on the table. He grabbed the Gemara and he was eyeing the Gemara until he came to the door, looked at the shaila, answered, went back the same way looking at the Gemara, and then went back into bed. Rabbi Lezer Plechensky said, Ich bin ein bisschen a wagende Kind. I was daring. So I asked him, the Rebbe kenned the Chals Baal Peh. There's a quip from Rav Meir Simcha that Rav Meir Simcha once said, Bis ich bin geworden 60, habe ich gar nicht vergessen. Als ich bin geworden 60, habe ich vergessen, als ich bin geworden 60. Till I turned 60, I never forgot anything. I started to forget. When I turned 60, I forgot that I turned 60. His memory was astounding. So he asked him, so what's the point? What are you looking into the Gemara for? And by the way, it wasn't an Elu Treifus. To which Rav Meir Simcha answered, and that's famous, Soif einecha boy ve'enenu. I asked my Rebbe if this is the pshat. The Rambam says, I don't remember the exact lashon, Ad emasai chayiv lil matayra, sagt the Rambam, hilchst ha-matayra, ad yoy moisoi. And then he says, Kol zman she'ena oisik b'limud hu sheicheach. It's an automatic. Could this pasuk be the makkah for this Rambam? And he said, it makes sense. But if you take a look in the Rashi, I think Rav Meir Simcha in this story is telling us a chiddush. Rashi, in a number of places in Brachas and Megillah, when he brings this pasuk, when the Gemara brings this pasuk, sagt Rashi, "V'sogate necha." I'm paraphrasing. Boy, if you close your eyes from the Gemara, he mishtakachas mimcha. It becomes forgotten from you. It's a little bit of an awkward lashon. V'sogarta, v'shachachta. Was meint v'sogarta einecha v'hi mishtakachas? There's a chiddush when it comes to learning. If you close your eyes, then the Gemara moves away from you in a b'china yamayim azveka. It's not that you forget like we forget things. No, there's a special thing going on here. Your relationship with the Limud is v'hi mishtakachas mimcha. Sie macht sich vergessen von dir. Du machst zu die Augen von mir? Geh ich weg von dir. Und memela, I could learn Bava Basra and I'll remember Elu Treifus. I think that this liegt in the chiddush of Rav Meir Simcha's Maisa. Rabbi say, I would like to go to a Nakuda. So you do the Ramban. The Ramban in Bava Basra, Chacham Adif Minavi, ends off a shtickle with these words. Afal pi shenitla nevuas haneviim shehu hamar v'hachazoin nevuas hachachamim shehi b'derech chachma loy nitla elo yoidim ha'emes beruach hakodesh shebekirbo. The word ruach hakodesh is thrown around a lot. And the word nevuah, aber ruach hakodesh bekirbam, was kommt von kennen, von a different level Talmud Chacham. I once heard B'Shem Rav Shach. There's a Rambam in Hilchos Yesod Torah. And Derech Agav, and Efshanish Derech Agav. Rav Meir Simcha in Meshech Chochmah in Pasha Shmoi says that the Rambam in Perik Zayin and Perik Ches of Yesod HaTorah is Bili Sofik divrei Nevuah. It's a lashon that he uses. The Rambam zogt, Rabbi say, allow me, I don't like to read Lashonis, but I need to for a moment. Mi Yesod Hadas Leida Shakel Menabe is Bnei Adam Veina Nevuah Chala El Al Chacham Gadol B'Chachma Giba B'Midoisov V'lo Yehi Yitzroi Mizgaba Olav B'Dova Ba'olam Elohu Mizgaba B'Daitoi Al Yitzroi Tomid V'hu Bal Deir Rechova Nechoina Ad Ma'oid Adam Shehu Memula B'Chol Amidus Ha'elu Shalom B'Gufay Kishi Yikonis Lepardes V'Yimshach Ba'oisen Ha'inyonim HaGedolim HaRechoikim V'Tiya Loi Deir Nechoina Lahavin Ulahasig V'hu Miskadesh V'Hoilech U'Poirish Midake Klal Ha'om Ha'hoilchem B'Machshechei Azman V'Hoilech U'Mezares Atzmai Melamed Nafshay Shaloi Tiya Loi Machshova Be'echad Midvorim B'Teilim V'Loi Mehev Le'Azman V'Tach B'Loisov Eladato Pnuya Tomid L'Mala Kshura Tachas HaKisei Lahavin Ba'oisen Atzuris HaKdoishes HaToiris Mistakel B'Chachmasi Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kula Mitzura Rishoyna Atabo Ha'aretz V'Yedeya Mehen Godloim Miyad Ruach HaKodesh Shoyra Olav Ube'es Shetenuach Olav HaRuach Tesarv Nashi B'Malas HaMalachim and so on and so forth. This is the Rambam's ladder to Nevuah. I heard B'Shem Rav Shach. What happens when a person doesn't make it to that final finish line? But he's along that entire spectrum. Ihr weißt, wie groß das ist? A drop beneath Nevuah. The Ruach HaKodesh that the Ramban's talking about. There are so many Nekudas by Rav Meir Simcha that point to this. Ki yidua, Rav Meir Simcha writes, he published some of the volumes of the Ohr Somayach in his lifetime, not all. And the Meshech Chochmah Ki yidua was published a year after. But on the Ksav Yad, written on the Shabbat, is Chuba B'Ritzoin Avinu Shebeshamayim. An extraordinary lashon. The Sefer is composed B'Ratz Avinu Shebeshamayim. It's reported that Rabbi Volozhner, he didn't say it sarcastically, Rabbi Vol, that wasn't his derech. Er hat sich Tage gewundert, von wann it weiß er? It's not the time, and the Olam here knows it all. But it's Yedua. Rab Chaim Stein, when he reprinted the Makar Baruch, brings in the Hakdama that the Makar Baruch told him that he once came into Rav Meir Simcha and saw Rav Meir Simcha ecstatic. And he asked him what was special. Rav Meir Simcha said that he had a dream. He just woke up from that dream. And in the dream, in Shemayim at Megeret, about the matzav HaTorah in the world, and Sinishdah, to which the Rashba got up and said, Siyeda in Dvinsk, there's someone who justified a girsa that I in my tshuvas didn't justify. With a brilliant word, a famous word that Rav Meir Simcha stellt zusammen in Ibn Ezra with regard to Ohr Somayach. The time doesn't allow. Aber das ist der Haskama von der Rashba in his Chalim. And Rav Meir Simcha hints at it in the Ohr Somayach, in Ma'aser Sheni himself, in the Yosef, the Meluim, as min hashamayim man gefiert auf den richtigen Weg. If I may say, and I'm sure many people have said, I think it's pashut, that that's where he felt that his chibah is beritzoin avinu shebashamayim. Weil azay sagt man in Himmel. It's Yidua. Rabbi used to say, I think they say it from the Ger Rebbe as well, Rav Meir Simcha's nevuah. Rav Meir Simcha's nevuah. Machon Aleh Zayis, how predicted in Pashas B'chikoisai, where and from whence will emanate Machon Aleh Zayis, the manifestation of the Teichacha. Die was halten Berlin is Yerushalayim, and as I weiter it's Yidua to most of the Olam. But Gedolei Yisrael, Rav Menachem Zemba, the Ger Rebbe, they were astounded when the war broke out. And Rabbi used to call it Rav Meir Simcha's Nevuah. Rabbi Levitan, Zayin Gesund, who's made a lifetime out of Rav Meir Simcha for himself, told me that recently he's published from Rav Moshe Sternbuch that he heard from Rav Motl Pogamansky, who heard from Rav Meir Simcha, or said over from Rav Meir Simcha. I'm scared to say it over, but it's published, so it's half of yours at homes. Didn't understand why people are leaving Slobodka to go to Chevron. Rachmana litzlan, 1/3 will be killed, and 1/3 will become niskalkal. What are they doing? Hashem Yirachem. He reports that Rav Meir Simcha said when they started the movement from Slobodka to Chevron, if it wouldn't be published and I only heard it, I wouldn't repeat it. Ruach HaKodesh HaBekir. Everyone knows Yidua. It's printed in the Hakdama in one of the prints of the Meshech Chochmah. His wife was Nifta Tammuz, Chof Zayin Tammuz. It was a terrible tragedy for him because there was nothing left for him. And he said to her, he leaned over, Chaya, Chaya, noch Chaya vel Zayin Badia. Chof Zayin Tammuz, Daled Elul, a few weeks later. The famous moifis that happened in Dvinsk with the overflow of the rivers, I remember hearing it as a child. What's most compelling is that it's printed by people who don't believe in the Torah or in those who gave it, and he who gave it still believe in Rav Meir Simcha and bring it in their autobiographies. But the Koyach HaTfilah, Rav Meir Simcha stood, some bring he stood on a gesher, some said he stood on ice, on top of the ice. And gedavent, and gedavent, and gedavent. And I heard that the Lashon Rav Meir Simcha said to the floodwaters, Ich bin da Mora da Ascha, und ich gehe dir nicht karashus drisas regel. But the koyach of Mora da Ascha. Well, Rabbi say, there's so much more to be said, and the time doesn't allow. The Chochmah of Rav Meir Simcha, and how he handled with people, in this town, the Chachmas are printed. You don't need me for that. I will share something with you that is not printed. I heard it from Rav Kreisworth. And I believe Rav Kreisworth, if it's possible, heard it in Dvinsk. I have to figure out the years. Everyone knows that the Rogatchover was an extraordinary Baal Mazba, orally, and the Sefer, the Chazay Shver. Hat Rav Meir Simcha gesagt, ich verstehe nicht. Wollte gedacht heißen Sofnes Paneach und der Sefer Yosef Rosen. Needs no translation. Many more such witticisms. Chochmah. I'm not here to give a biography. I'm here just simply that before we hear the shiurim of Gedolei Torah in Ohr Somayach, in Meshech Chochmah, aber ich sage nicht kasher, ich sage ein bisschen Rav Meir Simcha. Gedolim are indeed greater than the sum of their parts. But Rav Meir Simcha was the gadol that I think in his entirety, there's two neschos of what Rab Chaim Brisker's exact lashon was after the famous Peterburg conference. But weiß ich denn nicht, wer gadol da ist? It's not accepted by all that that's the exact lashon, but it is one of the versions. Everyone knows Rab Chaim's Merdike de Cheretz Meir Simcha, and the back and forth of whether the Chafetz Chaim brought Rab Meir Simcha as a piyus has been adequately disproven. Rab Meir Simcha is one of the few, perhaps one or two, the others are not identified, Gadol Echad, that the Mishnah Berurah brings by name in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, Balt Vidman Dasam. And it was printed years before the conference, so it's not a piyus, it's the Cheretz. Gadol Ador, where Rav Meir Simcha 100 years ago closed his eyes. He closed the tekufa of the Chassam Sofer, the tekufa of Rab Kivega. It seems that way, the totality. And therefore, especially for someone who left tragically, no family really, certainly no children, no dynasty, no yeshiva, but he just left us, left us the Yachanu Bayas of the Olam HaTorah in Lamdas and Al HaTorah, which is Khal Torah Kula. And thanks to our Chsanya, Reb Shimon soll sein gesund und stark, for having the wisdom and the foresight and the people who we work together with to say, what does 100 years mean? It's no different than 99 or 101. But just somehow it attracts people. So mamela lass mir euch nutzen. To get together and talk about the Rabban Shel Kol B'nei HaGoyla in every B'chol Malay HaMuvan. Zchus Yagen Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. And if this night will be an inspiration for people to learn more Ohr Somayach, more Meshech Chochmah, more Chedusha Rav Meir Simcha al Shas, and noch einmal a großen Dank to Reb David, sein gesund und stark, der Eibusher soll Marach Yom Shon sein Gesundheit, and thanks to Reb Shimon. Kol Tov.
Shkoyach Rabbi Geldwerth. The pasuk in this week's parsha says, "Leisachrish shor v'chamor yachdov." Leisachrish b'shor v'chamor yachdov. The Meshech Chochmah brings from the Chachmei Ashkenaz that the reason why the Torah asers to hitch together a shor v'chamor is because a shor, being a kosher animal, chooses its cud, and the chamor, who doesn't choose his cud, is hitched alongside it, thinking that the shor is eating gishmak, having a good meal constantly, and he's not being fed, and it gives the chamor a lot of pain. Incidentally, throughout Meshech Chochmah, you see an enormous sensitivity to every balchai, all the way down to animals. He always writes with great care and sensitivity to causing tsar. Later in the sixth parsha, he talks about that as well. The Meshech Chochmah points out that this pshat from the Chachmei Ashkenaz is consistent with the psak of the Rambam in Hilchos Kilayim. The Rambam paskins that mid'eraisa, the isser of l'sachish b'shor v'chamor yachdov, is limited to a kosher and a not kosher animal. But two kosher animals or two non-kosher animals is not asim mid'eraisa. Rav Meir Simcha, and then he go first. Before that, he goes on classically. He says a unbelievably innovative shot in Yerushalmi. Shver Yerushalmi's miyasher with that, which is classic for Rav Meir Simcha. But then he asks a question, the likes of which you'd rarely find in any other classic Aharon. He says the Rambam in Moyer Nevuchim gives a different pshat, a different tam for the mitzvah of l'sachish b'shor v'chamor yachdov. The Rambam says the reason is because by putting them together, a person is likely to come to breed them together as well and be over the isser of creating kilayim. Zokta Meir Simcha is shver. Lefi the Rambam's pshat in the isser that because you're going to come to put them together, what is a person more likely to do? He's more likely to put together two animals that can create offspring. He'll take two kosher animals, two not kosher animals, and create offspring. That's what he's more likely to do. The least likely a person is to do is to take two incompatible animals like a shor v'chamor and put them together. Nothing, no offspring can come from that. Nothing can come from it. Why would a person do that? So bleibt that tzarich in that how is it that the Rambam and Sefer Hayad stimmt nicht mit the Rambam and Sefer HaMoira? Now this, that Rav Meir Simcha often quotes the Moira, Nevuchim, the Rambam, is a chiddush. But it's the lesser of the chidushim. As a matter of fact, if you see the sign outside in the hallway, we were zoichet a nice michtav bracha from the great Gaon Shmuel Dump. He wrote a beautiful svarim on the Meir Simcha, on the Meshech Chochmah, the Makar Chochmah, Yad Chochmah, beautiful svarim. And he wrote a nice letter. And in the letter, he mentions that every Dalet Elul, he would go up to Reb Shach and cover the Yahrzeit from Meir Simcha. And Reb Shach told him that what did Rav Meir Simcha, how was Rav Meir Simcha, what did he do in Elul and what did he do in the Aser Simei Tshuva? In Elul, he learned the Rambam Sefer HaMoira, and Aser Simei Tshuva, he learned the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva in the Mishnah Torah. That's what he learned. So that Rav Meir Simcha brings the Sefer HaMoira, das nicht the große Chiddush. The Chiddush is that who asks such a kasha? Who asks, wie stimmt the Rambam and Yada, the Sefer HaMoira? These are two different disciplines that are usually not compared to one another. Now, be'emes, this is one of the big yisoidis that Rav Meir Simcha tells Avek. In Parshas Yisro, he says v'kvar amarti, which means he was, oftentimes he said this, ki divrei Rabbeinu, the Stam Rabbeinu, even a Meshech Chochmah refers to the Rambam, b'chol svarov, b'yad, b'moira, u'pirish HaMishnah, ruach achas b'hem. There's one spirit that runs through all of it, and you can't learn them separately. You can't separate the Rambam and Moira and the Rambam and Yad. This is the shita of Rav Meir Simcha, and he's true to his shita. He constantly asks such kind of kashas to give such kind of tirutzim. Over 20 years ago, I was zoichet to hear for the first time a shir from the Rosh Yeshiva, Gaon HaDoros, Rav Yaakov Drillman shlita. It was delivered in the Zupnik Beis Medrash for the Briske Oilam at the time. It was, to me, a truly life-changing experience. The Bekiyas was extraordinary. The Lomdis was sharp. But what truly changed the way I look at the Rambam was that he opened up before us a living Beis Medrash of the Rambam. He compared the Rambam to a first draft of the Pirush HaMishnah, to a later draft of the Pirush HaMishnah, to the works of the Talmidim of the Rambam, to the other Svarim, the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs. All of a sudden, what seemed to be in separate strands of Rambam became one life living Beis Medrash. The Rosh Yeshiva taught that not only is Ruach Achas Bahem, but there's a Ruach HaChayim in the Beis Medrash of the Rambam. It is therefore a great sugya to ask the Rosh Yeshiva HaGoyen, Rabbi Yankov Drillman shlita, to deliver a Yahrzeit shir in honor of the Ohr Somayach.
It's very small. It's a little smaller. It's a little smaller.
I first would like to ask Mechila that I'm sitting by the shear. It was not a cover to the Eilim, but I am physically impaired, and it becomes a necessity. Thank you. I am a Talmud of Gaon HaDoros shlita. It's my Yeshiva. And I'm eternally grateful to him for many things, but I'm eternally grateful to him for teaching us, his Talmidim, the beauty and the chiddush and the lightning, the mavrik of Gedolei Achronim, of Rav Meir Simcha, of an Avnei Nezer, of a Reb Shila Kutna. And, and these are not things that are usually taught. Rav Meir Simcha was Aktiv Ba'akasha for them. But, he pointed out to us their great chiddush and their mahalachim learning and how they were lightning. And I'd like to speak about a shtickle Ohr Somayach that was the first one that I heard Rav Hutner, it's almost 60 years, 58 years ago, point out. And it's, I remember him saying, Rav Meir Simcha sagt a chiddush on top of a chiddush. On top of a chiddush. That was his lashon, and it is a chiddush on top of a chiddush. I'd like to say when I speak about this. Rav Meir Simcha is matmiyah, which is a tmiyah. How come no place is it mentioned that if you hold havor lalav yotzes, meaning there's no chorus, no chatos, comes to teach you that it's only a lav, that no place is it mentioned that you get malchus. Nobody mentions that you get malchus. Rabbi Simcha says, "Me'oidi lepele be'einai." So Rabbi Simcha comes and says a chiddush nifla to answer this question. He says that Havara was b'chlal malacha, and we might see it from malacha, but it's not malacha. There's no kalaisa by malacha, the nekrasa. But it's still Chol Shabbos, Yeshivas. And there's Misa for it. Havara Lulav Yotzes, there's Misa for it, even though there's no chorus. Even though there's no chorus. That's what Rav Meir Simcha says. There's no chorus, there's no chatas, but there's Misa. And therefore, if there's Misa, it's a lav shnit lazaris Misa's bestin. A lav that comes to be mazer on Misa's bestin is ain't like a lav. There's a chiddush shaloi shama shum adam me'olam. Shum adam me'olam. Hopefully Rabbi Yosef that holds Havara lalav yotzes said this chiddush. This is a chiddush nifla ad ma'oid. I remember Rav Hutner pointing out, and we'll see the next chiddush that Rabbi Simcha said, and he says a chiddush on top of a chiddush, and with such life that he said it, with such life that we said it. We don't appreciate the Gdolei Achronim. We don't appreciate the Gdolei Achronim. We don't appreciate their sharpkeit, their lightning of them. And he pointed this out to us. Now, I want to be done a little bit on what Rav Meir Simcha says. The Rambam writes in the Parashah Mishnayos in Makis that there are 3 cases. He mentions 3 cases of lav shenit lazaris Mrs. Best and ein loikel alav. Now, these cases of lav shenit lazaris Mrs. Best and ein loikel alav in the Rambam are cases not where there's misa for this act, but lavin that are koilul aspects where there's lav and aspects where there's misa and aspects where there's misa. And the Rambam brings 3 cases, and the order of the Rambam is very significant. The order of the Rambam is very significant, and the psukim that he picks out are very the psukim that he picks out are very telling. The Rambam writes like this: the 3 cases. He says 3 cases. Lo yikach ish eish shaviv. That's 1. The Isser of eish shaviv. Lo yih kodesh. The Isser of schur, which nach the Rambam Lo yih kodesh is called the Isser of boil l'sacher, and Lo yih l'chayel him acher. Okay. Now that's why this order. Why in this order does the Rambam pick it? Because, thank you. Because he's coming off of the Mishnah, the first Mishnah that discusses the Chiyuv and Misa. Elohim on his Skolim. The first one is Haba Alei Shasav. So the Rambam brings that one. The next one, now what is Haba Alei Shasav? What is the case of a lav, of something that's kol in it, but it's not, but there's no misa for it, but the lav is there, That's Anusa Saviv, that the Yerushalmi says there's no Malchus, the Rabbi Yehuda. Or the way the Rambam seems to hold, Sheberes Yovim Shaloviv, there's also no Malchus. That means that that's the first case that the Rambam finds where there's a lav, that's kol cases with Misa and cases without Misa. And he brings that to the first one in the Mishnah, that he goes down the Mishnah, can't find anything else, but he does bring Mishkav Zacha, Kaddish. Why does he bring that pasuk? He's bringing the pasuk in Kiseitze. Why doesn't he bring the pasuk in the Aharon of ever? Because that's not kol, another thing that has malchus, that has lav, but no misa. That lo yekadish nach the Rambam in his Madur Kama, where he held that it's like the Takamunkus, that it's Eved. So lo yekadish Eved v'shivcha. So lo yekadish is kol mishkav zacher and Eved v'shivcha. And the Rambam also brings that as a case where there is misa, where there's misa in one case of the lav and no misa in the other one, and that he brings the pasuk of Yekadish. He doesn't bring he brings the pasuk in Mishnah Torah. He doesn't bring the pasuk in Achremes Sishkov. He doesn't bring that pasuk because that pasuk is only talking about Chiyav Misa. He wants to bring a lav that's kol both. And then he brings the third thing that he finds there, Lo Yilecha Elohim Achirim. What is he bringing, Lo Yilecha Elohim Achirim? It's clear that the Rambam understood, and Yedidi Rav Meir Kilson pointed out to me that that's Rashi Shita also, that this pshat in the Teres Kohanim. The Teres Kohanim says if you make an avodah zarah la'atzmacha, you make the avodah zarah, you make it tzelem la'atzmacha, you're over 2 shiurim. You're over 2 shiurim. That means if you make an avodah zarah for somebody else, you're over an issa. If somebody makes an avodah zarah for you, you're over an issa. And if you make one la'atzmacha, you're over 2 shiurim. Rabbi Yosi Oma, you're over a 3rd issa. Lo yilecha Elohim achirim. Making it tzelem. There's no misa for it, but making it tzelem. So it's clear the Rambam understood that making it, that the Rabbanan, the reason they're chaylik on Rabbi Yossi is not because they disagree with him that lo yilacha elhim acherim is koil lo yilacha elhim acherim is koil is having a tzelem, but because it's a lav shnit no zoros mises bezdin, and that's why it's ein loiken love. And if we're telling you how many azaris you're over, we're telling you that for the purpose of how many malkias you get. And if we have to tell you that for how many malkias you get, it has to be that you get malkias. So the Rabbi Yossi is saying you get a third malkias, and the Rabbanan disagree. You don't get a third malchus because that lav is a lav shnit mazaris bezdin, because it's also koil when you're makabel navoid zara as a getchka. So therefore you won't get malchus for it. Rav Kielsen pointed out to me that that's Rashi Shita. Rashi brings to make it sell him, and the Ramban is. That's only Rabbi Yossi holds that way. We don't hold that way. So Rashi's shita is no. We also hold that way. But for Rabbi Yossi, the reason the Rabbanan didn't bring Rabbi Yossi's is because there's no malchus for that. It's a lav shenit lazaris mises bezdin. But really, the lav is koil that. So that's the third thing. But if so, we have a problem. We see Rabbi Yossi holds lav shenit lazaris mises bezdin as a leiken alav. So even if Havara is there's Misa, Rav Meir Simcha is not answering the question. Okay? So nach the Rambam Shita, we still have this problem. Why is there no Malchus for no Malchus for Havara Lav Yotzes? Rabbi Yossi holds Havara, Rabbi Yossi holds Lav Shnit Lazaris Bezdin Loiken Alav. There's a sugya in Sanhedrin, a sugya Tmua, which we can answer with this, that Rabbi Yossi will hold that if somebody is born his chamoisa in an Eishes Ish, he'll get malchus for Eishes Ish. He'll get malchus for Eishes Ish for the Soif Biyah, because the Gemara is going in Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi holds Lav Shit Lazaris Mises Bezdin is like it. Going into that sugya is not our thing. So good. So, wonderful answer that Rav Meir Simcha says, but it doesn't work in the Rambam. Okay, so I want to attempt to say another answer in the Rambam. The Rambam says, Per Kaf Daled, from Ilcha Shabbos, Halacha Zayin, the Rambam says that there's an issa to give oinshim on Shabbos. There's an issa to give oinshim on Shabbos. And the pashtus divrei Rambam, and that's what Roiva the Achronim Neman is. That's even without a malacha. The Neza speaks about if you're allowed to give nidui on Shabbos for that reason. It's even when it's not a malacha. And this shita starts from the Goinim. The Shibbolei Aleket brings that you can't give Malchus on Shabbos because Malchus b'makom Yisai Medes. Now, if he means because of the Malacha, what does Malchus b'makom Yisai Medes have to do with this? But he means because that's an issue to give Einshim, but maybe only Misa. How do you know Malchus? He says Malchus is b'makom Yisai Medes, which the Rambam Shita is that way. That even though you can give Malchus with Shloisha, but Malchus is Malchus Misa. Okay. That is the sheet of the Rambam. Okay. Havara is the Lav Yotzes. But the Lav is Koil is something else also. It's Koil, the Isser of Loisavara, Eish Machon Aleh Zayis, B'yom HaShabbos. What is it, Koil? It's an Isser to give Einshim on Shabbos. It's an Isser to give Einshim on Shabbos. That is a classic case of lav shebaklolis ein loiken alav. Nach the Rambam, that you're not allowed to give einshim on Shabbos, then Havara will not get malchus because a lav shebaklolis, a a lav that's called different things at the same time is ein like in a love. It's ein like in a love. That's why there will be no malchus. That's why there will be no malchus. Rashi Shita in Yevamah seems that there's no malchus also. Taisus asks why and when. This comes up with a new Shita which doesn't say in Rashi. The Avnei Nezer says that Rashi holds like the Rambam, that there's a special issue of being manish b'Shabbos. So if there's a special issue of being manish b'Shabbos, then there won't be malchus because it's a lav shebeklolis. So that Rabbi Yosef is moed. Okay. So this is a makam loden on the Ohr Somayach. That's the first chiddush that he said. Then he came and said, the chiddush on top of the chiddush. The chiddush on top of the chiddush. He said like this, the Gemara in Yevamos is fakert. The Gemara says in Yevamos that if Havara is l'lav yotzis, we would say Esed Deichaloisas on it. Even though Esed Deichaloisas yesh by Koris, but Havara l'lav yotzis, we would say Esed Deichaloisas. Misa is doch more chomer than Koris. So we shouldn't say Esed Deichaloisas yesh by Misa. That's what Rav Meir Simcha is on himself. Sagt Rav Meir Simcha, Chiddush Nifla. The Chiddush on top of the Chiddush. That if you doiche a lav, yeah, the lav has misa. Since the lav is nitche, there's no hazara. A misa needs a lav. So since a misa needs a lav, the misa is bottled. There is no misa. There is no misa. And that says Koris doesn't need hazara, as the Gemara says. So because Pesach Milah. So, but he says, but you had an Esed Deichaloisas there of Koris. You had an Esed Deichaloisas of Koris. The Koris still exists. But you have Esed Deichaloisas of Misa without Koris. Then it's bottled. The Misa is bottled. Okay. Fascinating. Chiddush on top of a Chiddush. Two Chiddush. The Meir Simcha ends up, I'm going to talk a little bit about this Chiddush. Afki Chodeshu, I'm going to say what's Bilvavi. The Lev of Meir Simcha. The Lev of Meir Simcha. The Lev that's Mishkan Evna of Meir Simcha. This is what Meir Simcha said. Now let's talk about the Meir Simcha itself. The Meir Simcha says that it says that you moitzi alul of Bershus Harabim, potter al tzesed dechaloisas shebeshbek, you potter al tzesed dechaloisas from a carbon. So Meir Simcha, because the Yerushalmi will hold carbon needs hazara. And if you say esed dechaloisas, so there's no hazara, so there's no carbon. Korah still be, but there's no carbon. The same lumdus. Korah still be, but there's no carbon. Hafla a fella, Rav Meir Simcha says. Now, in the Rav Meir Simcha, we see how he's saying this thing, but he's saying it one way, and it could be said the other way. What's in the end? If you have an Esed Deichaloisas and this chorus, do you get Malchus for the lav? The way Rav Meir Simcha is going, you won't get Malchus for the lav, which is a very big chiddush. But you could say that since Esed Deichaloisas and the chorus exists, and the chorus exists still, so now the thing is also, there's no way to say that you have a mitzvah to do it. The Rivah says, Ein Esed Deichaloisas ve'esa, but the Loisa says, Doiche. That's talking by taking Tzipori Mitzayra, or making Kisi Adam, where you still have the mitzvah. You just have to find a way to do it. But when you don't have the mitzvah, when it's also, there is no mitzvah. But Rabbi Kvega doesn't run that way. Kvega doesn't run that way, and he comes from a Rashi and Yevamis, that lumdus is not correct. Okay, this is the thing. How much we have to be dovuk in Gedolei Hador, B'dor Shalifneinu, they taught us the goyness and the koich HaChiddush of the Friya Dekadairis. Now nobody looks at these svarim. They'll look at it, a kashula. Nobody looks at these svarim. And these svarim are mavrik, are lightning. Let me just finish you off with what the Yeshiva said, where he was coming from. He brings a shita chadasha from the Maramri Rutenberg. From the Maramri Rutenberg, he brings a shita chadasha that now, which the Maramri Rutenberg was chayse. His Talmud, Reb Chaim Ozer writes that he was chayse, that now Marasa doesn't has skila but no chorus. So he was done that maybe, well, why don't we say nach the Maram Rutenberg, why wouldn't we say that Yibum is doiche the Yisur of Ma'amarasa? Okay, that's where he was coming from. Rabbi say. What can I say? I'm eternally grateful to my Rebbe that he taught me what an Avnei Nezer is, taught me what an Ohr Somayach is, taught me what a Reb Shia Lekutna is. And these farm are lost. Nobody looks at them anymore. Maybe a little bit I can be Ma'ir the Olam to look and to chap the koich HaChiddush of these people, maybe a little bit. Yehei Zichrei Baruch of Rav Meir Simcha, and we should be zoicha to be doilev mayim amukim from his divrei Torah. Let me take the glass of water. Rav Meir Simcha, the chidushim of this.
The final portion of the program will focus on the Sefer Meshech Chochmah. It was my privilege to have played a small role in a recent publication of Rabbi Ron Wagner's English translation of and commentary to the Meshech Chochmah on Bereshis. I also took the liberty of writing a few short words of introduction. And there's one sentence that I'd like to share with the Olam. The Meshech Chochmah is a rare fusion of the entire scope of Torah genres. It stands out in every facet that it touches. Many Gedolim possess a distinct style. I heard from Rav Meir that a Talmud of Rabbi Denneberger, the predecessor of the Ohr Somayach, he was Rav in Dvinsk, was known as Denneberg then, later changed names to Dvinsk. A Talmud of Rabbi Ruvela once told Reb Chaim a chiddush from his Rebbe. And Reb Chaim then went on to anticipate every chiddush Rabbi Ruvela said in every single sugya based on chapping the Rabbi Ruvela's mahalach. A similar story is told about Rabbi Mishulem Igra and the K'tois. The K'tois came to Rabbi Mishulem Igra, told him one shtickle, and then Mishulem Igra was able to anticipate everything else that he was about to say. These Gedolim had a distinct style, which geniuses such as Rabbi Mishulem Igra and Reb Chaim were able to figure out in advance what they would say based on their mahalach. Rabbi Geldwerth already mentioned that the Meshech Chochmah himself in this week's parasha and Parasha Kiseitze demonstrate the same uncanny ability. He himself also goes with the derech of the Malbim, even though in the rest of the Sefer he does not go b'chlal b'derech ha-Malbim, but in Parasha Kiseitze, halfway through the Parashas, Mikan ve'elech al derech ha-Torah va-mitzvah, and then with the ganzkeit of the Malbim, the Yelas HaShachar, with all the Shemus and Erdofim, he continues going throughout the Psukim according to that Mahalach. So he also had this ability to be able to anticipate what other Gedolim will say. But Rav Meir Simcha's own style is impossible to anticipate. He can do anything and everything within the parameters of Torah. The entire scope of Torah genres, halacha, Kabbalah, Lomdus, Rabbi Geldwerth mentioned already, Drush, Pshat, Remes, philosophy, Musar, etc. And not just that, it stands out in every facet that it touches. I heard from the Talmud of Satmarov that he included the Meshech Chochmah in the pantheon of Svurim HaKadoshim. His Chidushim and halacha are studied by all, his Musar, his Drush. Rav Meir Simcha turned everything into gold. My Chaver Moshe Maimon quipped that perhaps it was because of this that Reb Chaim, because Rav Meir Simcha was so unpredictable and original, that Reb Chaim was in such awe of him. It's told that Reb Chaim wanted to get a skam on the Sefer Chidush Rabbeinu Chaim Alevi al Rambam from Rav Meir Simcha, v'lo yistayi milsa, because Reb Chaim was nifta before. They actually printed it. Reb Chaim referred to him as Mor de Trei Talmuda. Why? Because even Reb Chaim couldn't predict what Rav Meir Simcha would say. Rabbi Geldwerth was more ready. What is the source for pravering a centennial Yahrzeit? Using the kalim available to me, I searched and found a bit of a precedent. My Naya Yedid, Rav David Safir, he translated and published from Hungarian a letter that was written by a member of the Chassam Sofer's Mishpacha discussing the thwarted efforts in 1939 of pravering the centennial of the Chassam Sofer's Yahrzeit. It was Leistaya Milsa in the end because the war broke out and it wasn't shaykh to travel through Slovakia so easily in those days. The war came very early to Slovakia. And therefore, the idea of uniting all the descendants of the Chassam Sofer in one place to praver his 100th Yahrzeit was cancelled, and instead they made many local events l'chvoy the Yahrzeit of the Chassam Sofer. I also heard that the Rosh Yeshivas Zechon Levrach Rab Shnei Kotler at the 50th Yahrzeit of the Alta from Slobodka, he also made a very big deal about it. His 100th Yahrzeit is coming up. Maybe we'll have another event. We'll see. Rab Aharon's 50th Yahrzeit. The Yeshiva made a big deal. My Yedid Moshe Dembitzer suggested I should take a look at the Meshech Chochmah in Parshas Bahar. He talks over there about the inyan of Yovel. What's the inyan of Yovel? A period of 50 years. And he says that when a person is nifter, he leaves over his estate to his children, and with time, they can sell off parcels of land, and the family starts dispersing, people start parting ways, and there are distance grows between brothers. Every Yovel, everyone comes back to the family homestead, and it brings brothers together, reunites them. Rav Meir Simcha didn't leave any biological descendants as the Chassam Sofer did. There's also no physical yeshivas Dvinsk, as there is Mir, Telz, Brisk, etc. Rav Meir Simcha's legacy is his svarim, and the Dvinsk Talmidim are those of us who learn his svarim. What we have is a virtual yeshiva, which, as I mentioned in the Psicha, that means that although we, the Talmidim of Dvinsk, are not connected by a brick and mortar yeshiva, we are like kavim, nifrodim, nimshachim, el hamerkaz. But how do you have a yeshiva without a Rosh yeshiva? Rav Uren Reich shlita has been giving shiurim in Meshech Chochmah for a long time. Perhaps I can suggest that he is the virtual Rosh Yeshiva of the virtual Yeshiva of Dvinsk. I humbly would like to ask the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Uren Reich shlita, to close the evening with a talk about the Meshech Chochmah.
Whatever the rationale for coming together on the 100th Yahrzeit, the fact is, it's 100 years. There's no one living today who remembers Rav Meir Simcha. We used to have, where I lived in Clifton Avenue, there used to be a Yid, Rav Gvorten, Tyre Yid, an elder Yid. He's got Einiklach Baruch Hashem today in Lakewood. Rav Zalman Gvorten. And I used to tell my son, Rabbi Meir, who was a little boy, 9 years old, every Shabbos we'd go by, he'd be sitting there, we'd just say Shabbos to him, and shake hands with this Yid. You'll be able to tell your Einiklach that you shook the hands of a Yid who was by the Levaya of Rav Meir Simcha. 100 years goes by. Anoshim Gedolim, Reb Chaim Oizer, Chazanish, Rabban, have a connection to us in the actual world that we live, the Olam HaYeshivas, the Maseiris of the Yeshivas. Rav Meir Simcha's gadlus as a person was focused on people, places, institutions within Latvia that we don't know. The way, I was very struck, the way it's written on the Matzeva. They have a picture of his Matzeva. Adinenu mereinu v'rabbeinu agoinu amiti rabban shel Yisrael pe'er adoy tzadik yesodeilam. Mekoyer ha'anova ha'chesed v'harachmim. Who writes such a Matzeva? Mekoyer ha'anova v'chesed v'harachmim. The Sarah Torah of Meir Simcha was epitomized, chesed and rachmim. But we know very little about the recipients of the chesed v'rachmim. It's mafusam that he was oisik, becharitzas neflo, on shalom bayis, on being machzir, people who never were meruchik from their wives, the wives were meruchik from them. But we don't know any of these people. Rav Meir Simcha lives for us in his Sforim Akdoshim, Ohr Somayach, Meshech Chochmah, and Chidush Rav Meir Simcha, and Shuvas. The Sifrei Halacha of Rav Meir Simcha, we only have the Ohr Somayach, but we don't have more than a fraction of what he wrote in Halacha. It seems there were boxes and boxes of tshuvas that he wrote, which he said himself will be me'er la'olam v'lo zachinu. And it went in phases and phases. We know 3 svarim of the 4 Ohr Somayachs were printed. B'chayev, the last one was printed right afterwards. And then in Tovshin Vov, Tovshin Zayin, I don't know exactly, Yidden Eretz Yisrael printed a little chiveres on Bob Kama, Bob Metzia. And then Zachinu, Reb David Greenwald, who's Baruch Hashem with us here today, Gvaldige covered for us. was zeicher to find the Metzia Rab's Chidushim of Rav Meir Simcha al Hashas, and then later Rav Osband found Tshuvas in Yivo. And all this together is still only a fraction of what Rav Meir Simcha wrote in Halacha. Our tikva is, our tefillah is, Yitochen Ma'od. In today's world, with technology and with different hamapeches, tapuches ha'olam, mi yedea, adayin lo yavadnu atikva that im Yit Hashem will be zeicher to lahachzer Torah liyoshin, will be zeicher to Rav Meir Simcha's ksovim and halacha also. His sefer on Agoda is one sefer. It's unlikely that there's much more than Meshech Chochmah. There's a little bit more, but not much more. This is the sefer that he wrote. This is his magnum opus in Agoda. And it's amazing. It wasn't printed b'chayav. And I saw a hesped written right after the petirah of Rav Meir Simcha from an Odom Godel, a very long hesped. And he writes there that we know, he writes about his whole derech halimud and his goynes. And I say without hesitation, he was the greatest Talmudical goyin of our generation. But we know very little about his Agoda. We don't know. And I'm reading it, little about his Agoda. And I realized he never saw the Meshech Chochmah. This was before the Meshech Chochmah was written. And he writes that we see Havrokis in Ohr Somayach here and there that show that he was Isaac in this Indian also. But we don't know what it is. The Sefer Meshech Chochmah came out and was Makkeh Galem. And this continues ad hayom hazeh. It's a sefer which belay guzma is yochid b'minoi le'nimtza k'boisem hazeh. There's no one who can compare to it. There's not shaykh to compare to it. It doesn't belong to any specific genre. It has kol ha-boisem of kol ha-Torah kula. And there's one mila in this sefer which in today's world is considered a big chisoron. It's not user-friendly. Rav Meir Simcha was not looking to make a sefer with headings and explain himself. He writes different ways, different pieces. It's not malutish. A younger man writes a shtickle Torah today. He picks his genre, which sefer he wants to imitate, and he uses those lashonos. You know very little about the person, except which yeshiva he learns in, or who he wants to be mizdama to. Rav Meir Simcha, because kibiyochel, it's so raw. It's the mechaber himself. It's an oyer godel. Sometimes you see the simcha of verämpfering a teres koinen with a mer nevuchim. Sometimes you see the leiv that's poem with rigshe avas yisrael. You see so much in the Sefer. This is the nitzchias of Rav Meir Simcha. Ohr Somayach, Chidush Rav Meir Simcha, and Meshech Chochmah. To be makdim a little bit about the Sefer before I get to the, I don't know how much time we'll have, to speak about Rosh Hashanah in B'Mishnas Rav Meir Simcha. There's a vote of Rav Meir Simcha that I'd like to say over, and like many, many divrei Torah, you can only speculate whether you really were aimed exactly what he says. He seems to almost deliberately leave it unclear. So I'm going to say over the vote, the Olim can look it up afterwards and decide if I'm being mechaven to the amitas hakavana. But the vote kashula atzma is dvorim nifloim. There's a posik that we say every day at least twice, 3 times. V'ahavta es Hashem elekecha, b'chol levavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol ma'odecha. Your avatar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will be with what you give. What do you give? Kol levavcha, all your tshukis, b'chol nafshecha, mesiras nefesh, b'chol ma'odecha. What's ma'odecha? Poshet, kipshutay, rechush. Give away your money. Ma'od, that's the Rosh by Yaakov Avinu, by the Bnei Loven, Ma'od. And then the Mishnah and the Sifri says a different pshat. B'chol midashu moedet loch, have a moedet loy b'moed ma'od. Whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets out to you, be moedet to him, b'chol ma'odcha. So this is a different b'chol than the first two. This is not with something that you're ayev Hashem. B'chol ma'idcha is a drosha, how you should recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu even when things are going difficult. Shvera pshat neposik. And b'chlal, ma'idcha is meloshen midah, and midah means b'chol midah shu midah lev, midah midah. It sounds a very far-fetched pshat, reading into the words b'chol ma'idecha, b'chol midah shu midah lach. And here Rav Meir Simcha says something astounding, which gives us a new light into this Pirush HaPosik. And to explain it, I'd like to be makdim a Gemara in Tainus, an amazing Gemara, in which the Gemara talks about a subject that certain Amiroim had Gilu Elio. And the Gemara says there was a Meir called Rav Breika Chuzo, have a shchiach b'shuk dveilaft, have a shchiach Elio Gabei. Elio Novi would come to him. And there was a big market in those days. The marketplace was the mokum for the Amoin, everywhere. All business was done. Hundreds of Yidden were there. And Rav Breika asked Elio Novi, who over here is a Ben Elam Abo? And he looked around. The Gemara brings the whole story. First he said nobody. Then he said Pliny just walked in. And who is this Pliny? This Pliny the Gemara brings was Mersa Nefesh, literally to be Matzel B'nai Yisrael from a Michshel, a grace of mensch, Ben Elam Abo. At the Hochi V'Hochi, the Gemara says, while he was talking, two people came in. And when Eliyahu Novi saw them, he said, those people are also B'nai Elam Abo. So he was Rav Breika wanted to know what's the uniqueness of these people. Who are they? He went over to them, and they said, Inshe B'ducha Anan. We are people, we have a way of making jokes. This is what we know. We know how to lift up people with jokes. And wherever we see two people who have a machlekes, we go over to them and we diffuse the tension by making a joke. And when we see people who are down, we make jokes. B'nai Elam Abo. So this is a new mahalach to become a Ben Elam Abo. You make jokes, make mesameach levovos, and that's it. You're a Ben Elam Abo. Schwer zu verstehen, das ist Gemara. And what I think the pshat in the Gemara is, and this is a tremendous Yahrzeit and a big chizik for all of us. There's a word that's bandied around very much, Bal Kishrin. Pliny is a Bal Kishrin, Pliny is not a Bal Kishrin. Everybody's a Bal Kishrin in some things. There's some people who are brilliant in the world of music, and in anything else, average intelligence. And there's all kinds of things in the world. Everybody has a uniqueness. And there's a uniqueness of koich of bedichsa. There are some people that have average intelligence. When they open their mouth, everyone laughs. And when they actually say something, then people laugh again. A koich. What's that koich usually used for? Unfortunately, it's used to ridicule, to mock, to be satirical. At the best, for panosa, abautchen. These people had a unique koyach. And they took their koyach and they said, we could use this koyach, l'shem kodesh, to be mesameach, people who need that koyach. We're not going to use it for anything else. We're going to use it for that. When a person has a uniqueness and he uses it, bishvil ruchnius, then he is a ben olam haba. That's what you're here in Olam Hazeh for. B'chol mo'idecho, Taich Rav Meir Simcha means your mo'id, that you have, that you're bigger than someone else, that you're special, that you're gifted, that you're talented. Use that. B'chol levavecha, give away your levavecha, give away your nafscha, give away your mo'idecho. Zok Rav Meir Simcha. And what's the mo'idecha of all human beings? The mo'idecha of all human beings over animals is that an animal cannot do something for 7 years kedei to have panosa afterwards. There's no such concept in the animal world. A human being has the intelligence to understand that sometimes you have to suffer and you go through difficulties and you're abused kedei that afterwards you should have maila and gedula. is if this is the moedecha of everybody, is b'chol midah shehu moedel have a moedel b'moed realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving you for your few years in Olam Hazeh suffering, kedei that you should have a good Olam Haba. Rabbi say everyone has their ma'od. These were two people that the Gemara talks about that had a koyach to be mevadeach people. There's a bigger koyach. There are people who have literally a koyach to be mesim shalom benish le'ishtoi. They understand how to say the right word. A gewaltige ma'od. Ashri me, someone who takes that koyach and uses it. There's other koyachs. But there's a koyach of ma'od which is bigger than all of them. The koyach to be a godel petirah. Someone who has extraordinary kishrenis, extraordinary koyach of focus, a brilliance, and he takes that ma'odcha, and he's oyeves Hashem b'chol avavoi, b'chol nafshoi, u'b'chol ma'odoi. You look in Meshech Chochmah, this is a gilui of the b'chol ma'odcha of Rav Meir Simcha. Yochid u'miyuchid. Such a ma'od, such extraordinary kishrenis, such havrokis, such a panoramic view of kol Torah kula. It's only a echod b'deire that could write such a sefer. The Rav Abramsky, the Chazon Yechezkel, was brought the sefer from Reb Chaim Kanievsky, a younger man, time at Ikra. He looked at the sefer, he went through it, he was very impressed. He said, only one person in Adoyer can write such a sefer. To take psukim, ask kashas from the Yerushalmi, and to answer tirutzim based on ideas that you have from Kol Torah Kula, for them darf man sein, Reb Chaim Kanievsky. To schreiben am Meshech Chochmah is nur für eine in deire deires. The Kol Torah Kula is the ritzpas v'azorah. That's the accessibility. Rav Meir Simcha has lefonov bevasachas Kol Torah Kula that everyone can see as soon as you open up a Meshech Chochmah. The havrokis, the chidushim, the rayonis. It's able to get me better. You take a look at the pieces. A kasha from do, a rayon, and like lightning do, v'chazeu pirish shom, and the way he brings it out, incredible. More than that. There are dvorim, yikorim, besoich pnine ha-Meshech Chochmah. Reb Shlomo Zalman, kach shemati, someone came to Reb Shlomo Zalman and told him they now have the ksav yad of the Meshech Chochmah, ki yadua. The Bolshevik, and I don't know, Shaded Delilah just took everything and took it for themselves and gave it out to museums. I don't know exactly how it came, but we now have it, I'll call upon him. And he said, the Welt sagt, ki yadua, that he wrote the Sefer when he was 18 or 17, whatever the legend is, but he was very young, that's for sure. He says, but if you look at the Sefer, you could see that there's Hisofis on the side, and there might, I don't know exactly, maybe 20% of the Sefer, he said, is written later. The bulk of the Sefer was written when he was young, but there's a significant percentage that's written later. So that's what he told Rav Shlomo Zalman. I've never seen it. Rav David says, I'll say, ich weiß nicht. Right. So he's saying there's more written over the sides, maybe somewhere else. I don't know. Al Kopon, that's what he said. So Reb Shlomo Zalman said, Tanuch daite she'enachti is daite. I'm happy that you say this, because there are pieces of Meshech Chochmah that I didn't believe Rav Meir Simcha as a younger bocher can das schreiben. At kan. So I think it's a double poshet, Rabbi say. What did he mean? He wasn't Talmud Chochem enough? We have no hasogya in the Madregas HaTorah of Rav Meir Simcha as a young bocher. The Welt sagt, Kodim Kol, that when he was very young, the Welt hat gesagt, es wächst noch a will goin. Now, that's obviously a guzma. But die guzma sagt man echt noch auf Yechidim. That's the first thing. Le'ezik Nusay, they asked him, you write diyukim of vovs that you only find in divrei ayomim, of oisis and shinuyim. we don't see you learning Tanakh. We see you're only learning Torah Shebal Peh. You're learning Gemara, Tosefta, Mechilta. So Rav Meir Simcha hat Mafter given. When ich bin gewesen 9 Jahre alt, when I was 9 years old, ich habe durchgelernt Tanakh zweimal, thoroughly. Von dort das Munich bekufse. So we're talking about Gaonische Kishrenis and Ashkide Neira that we have no shaykhs to. Was hat ihm gefällt? What was missing in Rav Meir Simcha when he was 18 years old that he didn't have to be able to write the full kite of the Meshech Chochmah? Rav Shlomo Zalman clearly meant that there are hergeshim which come with the experience of life, that a person who is mizbeinen and feels for other people starts to be magish hergeshim. Those hergeshim are part of the B'chol Mo'idecha of Rav Meir Simcha. He put that back into Torah, and you can see it all over Meshech Chochmah. Sometimes he'll talk about the feel of a ritzeach when he knows that he can't get out of the ear mikvot for 14 years. Sometimes he'll speak about how a person who's desperate will do certain things. The pain of a person who has busha. When he talks about the kabbonis, the Gemara in Seita Daf Lamed Beis, how the Torah was chasa on a person's busha, it comes over and over again in Meshech Chochmah. He was living this Gemara. The Chain Dvorim Rabbim. The Yosim is there. Rav Meir Simcha went a step further. The Chachmei Amusa were very mimic in Torah's psychology and Kochs HaNefesh. Negiyas, big sugya, taka, big sugya. The kahena, ritzainis that people have. Rav Meir Simcha writes a lot about that. But he went further. He was mimic in how ummas, nations, and societies rise and fall. He had a panoramic view of history. He brings things from China, from Saba, from here, from there. I don't know where he saw, where he read this. He knew everything. And he understood the way, what an ummah needs. When he speaks about the regesh halaumi, very muzar to Ben Torah in today's world, this is treif. And you look at Meir Simcha, he brings it not once, not twice, it's over and over. And you begin to understand. You look around the world, lahavdul, umas ha'elam. What's the beginning of a Yerida of a country? What we have today. When you start hating your own country, when you find some kind of perverted desire to make your own country into a criminal, you have no pride, then your country falls apart. What pushes a country to be matzliach? Because people are nationalistic and they believe in their country. The nationalism is really based on nothing. It's just because it's chena mokam al yeshvav. So it is. Lahavdil, klal Yisrael. The regesh le'umi that Rav Meir Simcha is talking about is Chalil and Ishvan the Rishonim. The regesh le'umi is if a child in Lakewood, if a child in Bnei Brak doesn't have a pride that he's connected to the Ovos HaKdoshim, he doesn't understand that we will live through Yetzias Mitzrayim. If this to him is some kind of fruma mutzah sefer, but he's not magish, teich, this is a neshama, then he's missing something very vital for his chiyas. And this comes through the whole time. B'shivim nefesh yoda avisechel Mitzrayim. V'atal somcha Hashem lekecha kekech v'ashmaim l'roiv. Rav Meir Simcha says, and the way Rav Meir Simcha talks, why could HaKadosh Baruch Hu not give the Torah, Meir Simcha, to the Ovos HaKdoshim? Avos ha'umah. Why did he give it to this first generation coming out of Mitzrayim? Sagt Rav Meir Simcha, because there are in nations concept of national consciousness. You talk to a Yid today about Auschwitz, he doesn't know it from a book. He doesn't know it from because someone said to him, and therefore he knows that the Holocaust deniers are not true. He says, I'm a Tzias Chai, me lebt das mit, mom das allein gesehen. Keilu mom das allein gesehen. Sagt Rav Meir Simcha, 3 people, however great they are, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankel, Avos Ummah, cannot create a national consciousness that for Deirei Deiris, we will live with the hergish of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the 40 years we were in the Midbar. You, Moshe Rabbeinu says to this Deirah, you came to Mitzrayim as a sizable family, 70 people, nice for a Sheva Brochus, not enough. You came out, Kekeich v'Hashemaim l'roiv. you can instill this yediyah in the next generation so that it should become so much part of the people living in Eretz Yisrael that they will live with the 40 years of training that they had in the Midbar. And this is a theme that comes over and over again in Meshech Chochmah. The 30 years in Midbar are not the tachlis or Adam. For a person to live in a place where there's no goyim that are trying to be mefatim to do avodah zarah, and there's no mokim for keichi v'aitzim yodi, and everybody is pretty much similar to everybody else, das ist nicht the tachlis achayim. That's education. For 40 years, Klal Yisrael was trained to understand the Yeshivas of Amunah and Bitochen. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, take that and be kekoich v'hashamayim, and be mayor for the Deiros HaBoim, so that thousands of years hence, this should be something inbuilt within every year, this regesh le'umi, that we are children of this ummah, hab'ata v'chatonim mikol ha'amim. This is a regesh le'umi. Ata v'chatonim mikol ha'amim. We are the Am HaNivcha, and we have that Mordecai Messiris. The Ma'oid of Rav Meir Simcha, as we heard before about the Gaon Malbim. In Kiseitze, when he talks, piece after piece, his masbet diyukim in Sifri, al derech HaGaon Malbim, he doesn't just go with a system. He has the whole 613 klolim of the Ayelos HaShachar, the Hakdama to Sefer Vayikra, commotion is inspired by Ayelos HaShachar, Siman Tov Yud Gimel. It's as though he wrote it. He's quoting them. He's going right into the Teres Mishnos Shel HaGaon Malbim. He has the whole thing down pat, and he's masbe gans kiseitze al pi HaGaon Malbim. He has the blick on so many different things, like Rav Shamshir for Hirsch. He has the Koich Hadrush, as we heard before. Everything. It's a Mavel al Korayin. Okay, that's the Hakdama. Now, how long do I have? I don't know how long I've spoken for. You'll tell me if I go over my line. I want to say a word about Rosh Hashanah, which is, ironically, Rav Meir Simcha doesn't say this, but it's based on what Rav Meir Simcha says. Tiku b'chodesh Shofar, b'kesel yom chagenu. The Gemara says, Ezeu chodesh sha'chag miskasa b'hem. The Gemara takes note of something about Rosh Hashanah. We don't hear very much about it. It's not things we hear about in Yeshivas so much, but the Gemara makes an asik out of it. Every Chag, you can see the Levana. Pesach, Sukkot, even Shavuos, which is Hemshcha Pesach. But Rosh Hashanah, Chodesh Miskasabay. Zeh Rosh Hashanah. Tiku b'chodesh Shofar, b'kesel leyom chagenu. What's the significance of this? Steht nicht. Poshet Pshat, every Chag which is coming to say at v'chatonim mikol ha'amim, Klal Yisrael's nimshel levana, so we want levana b'teikva. On Rosh Hashanah, kol ma'dekayef inish tvei, ma'ale tvei, we keep ourselves under the radar. Tiku b'kesel yom chagenu, ki choik Yisrael hu mishpat lelekei Yaakov. Okay. We're going to see later Meir Simcha a whole different Pshat. And the Ascholas HaDvorim is Dvorim Mufloim b'Yosef. Rabbeinu Meshulam, Taisus brings in Rosh Hashanah, says another pshat in the word Bakesa, that Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Chodesh. And we bring a Musaf of Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, Mufurish HaPosik, Milvad Eidos HaChodesh u'Minchosa. But it doesn't say in the Torah you bring a Chatas. On Rosh Chodesh there's a soil of Chatas. So Rabbeinu Meshulam said there's no Chatas. Rabbeinu Tam said there is a Chatas. He said, I don't mean there's no Chatas. We don't mention the Chatas. B'kesel leyom chagenu. There's a Chatas for Rosh Hashanah, but we don't mention the Chatas of Rosh Chodesh. Steht in Taisus. Taisus brings a Yerushalmi, I believe, that we don't have. But Taisus says as follows: Rav Shimon Gamliel had a son, Rabbi Bosim Kali, that he had a nice voice. And he was a Bal Tefillah on Rosh Hashanah. Viele bis man hat zu neuem, und wir gehalten, Khal Kol Torah für so Sach. And in those days, they didn't have a Nusach Kavur. So when it came to being maskir, the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, the Ilm told him, mention the Chatas. Milvad is Rosh Chodesh b'chosa, ishtik. He wouldn't go further. He didn't want to mention, this is Rabbi Meshul's shitta, that ein anu maskirin le petirah le betfilah, we don't mention the chatas of Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because this chatas of Rosh Chodesh, the Gemara says, is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Taviu kapara alai al shemiyatati es yireach. He didn't want to mention this. Pirush the mutav sheyovei zakai v'yechaper ala chayev v'al yovei chayev v'yechaper ala zakai. Pirush ahud Rosh Chodesh koru chayev mishum do'ama HaKadosh Baruch Hu heviu kapara alai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is chayev. I want to mention that on Rosh Hashanah. This is Dvorim Mufloim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is chayev. Wie redt man das heraus von dem Oil? What does it mean? It's Dvorim Nistorim B'Yosef. The Etzem Gemara, which we mentioned, that the Gemara says that the Levana came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu made two Ma'oros HaGdolim, the Shemesh v'Yerech, and the Yerech said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ein shnei melochim mishtamshim b'keseh echad, Omla HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lechi mati es atzmich. So she said, Mechi mishum she'omati dova hogan, I'm going to have to pay a price. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Taviu alai kapara al shemiyatati es Yerech. This is a Gemara which Kemuven has no kipshut, has no pshat al derech hapshat. You are like kapora. The Rebbe said, bring a kapora for me. Maral, Bali Said, Bali Machshava, Bali Rain, Bali Drush. Everyone has what to say. Until the Sefer Meshech Chochmah, I did not see anybody who says a pshat that's miskabel al derech hapshat. Rav Meir Simcha says, Dvorim nifloim al derech hapshat, to be masbeh this Gemara with a Medrash Rabbi in Beis. The pashtus of the Gemara is that the Levana came and said, how did we learn in Cheder? It was a greedy Levana, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished the Levana. We are the Levana. Klal Yisrael, the Rambam says in Kiddush Levana, on Nimshla Levana, we wax and wane like the Levana. We're compared to the Levana who is Cheder, Shvet Aharon. State in Medrash Rabbi, this is, Rav Meir Simcha quotes this Medrash. The Medrash Rabbi in Beis teaches us a big vort. It's a question in the Medrash. Is there any tachlis to the oil of the Levana? It's so slim, it's so small, negligible. What's the tachlis? Zog the Gemara, zog the Medrash. Le nivra lohoyer ela galgal chama bulvad. Oil is for the chama, not for the Levana. Im kein loma nivras Levana, melamed shetzofa HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'asidin evdi kechovim la'seisen alahus, Oma HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ma im meheshein shnayim, machishin zeh evdi kechovim la'seisen alahus, ilo haya echad alachas kama v'kama. Was steht da in die Medrash? Da steht in Medrash, Dvorim Nifloim. There was a koyach in the Deiros Rishonim of Yitzrad Avodah Zarah. People had a yetzer, a drive to be mishtachve to an Avodah Zarah. Of all the thousands and millions of Avodah Zarahs in the world, there was one that exerted a pull more than any other Avodah Zarah, and that was the sun. Because any intelligent human being knows that everything that we have on this earth, all the energy, the heat, the light, everything we have comes from the sun. So if you're in the mode of Avodah Zarah, this is the place where you see the charm of the Chama. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would Chalila blot out the Chama, 8 minutes later, the world would cease to exist. There would be no rays of light and nothing. So even the Malchim, Mizrach, Mariv, the Gemara says, they were kings themselves. Manichim Kisreim, they'd put down their Kesa in deference to the Memshelas Hachama. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created something very interesting in the psyche of a human being. When there's one supreme being, it has a charm and a tug. The only one. He's the only one who has this mila. Once there are two brothers fighting for the same position, it's not the same thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, if the Chama is the only light in the world, it's going to exert a tremendous attraction for Ovdei Avodah Zarah. So the Medrash, I'm going to make a Levana that has a little light. That's also something. And even then, the Chazal say, "Ma'im mishein shnayim machishin zeh zeh Ovdei Chochmah oisen oisen alohos ilo ye'echad alachas kama v'kama." So Rav Meir Simcha, this is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu originally made Shnei Ma'oros HaGdolim. And I'm being marchiv as Adibur. What Rav Meir Simcha means is that Avada the Levana was right. You're creating a memshala. You want memshelas, the memshelas hayay, memshelas halayla. Lias moishlim bekerev tevel. Ain't shlim malachim mishtamsh bekesrecha. This is not a formula for success to have two moishlim. You have one. So Avada the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, into our seichel, should have only created one chama. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that this will create a yitzur d'Avodah Zarah. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu created two, which is a little bit awkward. Not the way comes again the Levana and Zog, Rebbeinu Shalaylam. Ein shnei malachim mishtamshe bekeseh echad. It's not a covet for you that there should be two malachim. I want that when Yidden say Tevim Ma'oros Shabora Lekenu Yitzorim B'das B'vina V'haskel Koyach U'gvura Nosim B'em Liyis Moishlim, the Son should reign supreme. There'll be Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Ha'roitze Lita is Yove V'yita, but ich mon kveit Shemayim. Der Eibishter says, you mon kveit Shemayim. Was auch dann? Wird das sein? Hat der Levone gefragt, V'chi mishum shomati dova hoken? So I'm going to be now Goyim Avodah Zarah in the world. Who's going to take care of this extra Avodah Zarah that's going to come because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mamayit the Levona? Oma HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hört a wort von Rav Meir Simcha, Haviu alai kapora. This is on the house. This kapora is going to be on my cheshbon. It's like an employer that asks someone to work extra hours. The person says, why should I work extra? Off my cheshbon. You won't lose out, believe me. It's worth it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Haviu alai kapora al shemiyatati as yirech. And this stims gewaldig with another word from Rav Meir Simcha, which I have to share with you. Rav Meir Simcha says that if you look in Parshas Pinchas, it's Dvorim Gluyim, but I don't know how many people are, I certainly wasn't aimed on it. It says by the Parsha of Pesach, it says, bring a musaf, the chatos, l'chapra aleichem. Shavuos, l'chapra aleichem. Rosh Hashanah, l'chapra aleichem. Yom Kippur, it doesn't say l'chapra aleichem. So Rav Meir Simcha, that's no problem. Everyone understands that in every other yontiv, that's the only kapara that we have. Or Yom Kippur, it's a small part of the Seder of the Yom, the Musaf. The tug is our tug from kapara without this kolm. But then when it comes to sukkahs, again, it never says l'chapra aleichem. Dvorim nefloim. So Rav Meir Simcha ge'oini ge'oinis. So Rav Meir Simcha, again, I'm being marchiv a little bit. On Shabbos, ki yadua, there's no musaf. There's no chatas in the musaf. There's shnei oilis. Stellen sich the Rishonim. Why not? So Rav Meir Simcha, the shaila is not why not. The shaila is why is there a musaf for kapora? Why is there a chatas for kapora? Good. Steht in Chazal, Thomas Mikdash for Kadosh. What's the inyan? So Rav Meir Simcha, because on Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot are Yemei Adin. Mefurish Mishnah. Ba'abor prokem oilam nidin. But Pesach al Atvuah. Ba'atzeres al Peres ha'ilon. Rosh Hashanah kol b'yelam over in front of Kidnei Morain. B'chag nidenim al amayim. So therefore, each of them needs a kapara to be zeicher b'din. So Rav Meir Simcha, how did Chazal know that b'Pesach nidenim al Atvuah, ba'atzeres nidenim al Peres ha'ilon, b'chag nidenim al amayim? Rosh Hashanah, it says Yom Trua. Over there, where's the remes? They just knew the Kabbalah. No. So Rav Meir Simcha is a Mefurish Gemara. The Gemara says, Mipnei ma omra Torah, that we bring Omer on Pesach, Kadesh, we should be zeicher to be nidin l'tvuah. V'chein ba'atzeres Peres ha'ilon on atzeres. V'chein b'chag nidonim al hamayim. So Rav Meir Simcha says the kapara is based on the fact that the Torah said we need a kapara because otherwise we wouldn't have those mitzvahs. Pesach, the Omer, it says mefurish in the Torah. Shavuos, it says mefurish in the Torah, the din of shtei alechem. B'chag, it doesn't say in the Torah, nisach hamayim. It's nur mit von einer Remes, mit Haloch l'meish Sinai. Hat der Eberste nicht gewollt, soll stehen mefurisch, als es da jemand din auf Sukkos. Es ist doch nicht Chamaim, es ist jemand din, aber es steht nicht in der Torah. I say, who are din, when there's a musaf which has within it a chatos, it can't say mefurish in the Torah, lechaper alechem, because the Torah has an agenda that there should be a kapara, but it shouldn't be mefurish b'Torah. Mamish, ge'onis. So we made a Shabbos. There's no reason to have a kapara. What about Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh, get a race from Rav Meir Simcha, the whole different thing. It's not coming because we need a kapara. It's a token from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a gift. Ich schenk dir a matana von kapara. This kapara is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because we have an extra burden because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mamai Diarech, that we have to be Mavaya, we have to destroy all this extra Avodah Zarah. And the Gemara says that when the Malchim Mizrach Amarav are Mishtachvim, Miyad HaKadosh Baruch Hu's koyes, who's he koyes on? Not koyes on them. It's koyes on Klal Yisrael. They state in Teisvus. Bilam wanted to say Kalem. Vaisleis HaKadosh Baruch Hu's being koyes on Klal Yisrael. Rebbeinu Shalom, you're giving us extra work. I'll give you the kapara of Rosh Chodesh. This explains beautifully the Pekin Reb Lezer that the Torah brings that women on Rosh Chodesh have a yontif because they didn't serve Avodah Zarah bisman the Chet HaEgel. This is the yontif of Rosh Chodesh is not being zeicha to push away the yitzhak Avodah Zarah. So it's very understandable. Rosh Hashanah, we want to be zeicha b'din. What's the best way to do it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I will do it on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is mesugel for kapara. Ki chayk li Yisrael hu mishpat lelekei Yankel. So what should be our tefillah on Rosh Hashanah? We should stand up and scream. Soy lechaper, we need a soyer over here. Chatzas LaHashem, you owe us one. And what sagt the Torah? No. You don't come into Rosh Hashanah talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu about what he owes you. Al yovei zakai, al yovei chayev yechaper al zakai. You don't come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah, listen, I owe a lot to you, and you owe a lot to me. Let's cancel everything, and we'll start again. Rabbi Shem says, Ich darf nicht kemechutonim Rosh Hashanah. Don't tell me what I owe you. You have to talk as though there's no chatos bechlal. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been mesavev Rosh Hashanah on your behalf. Let it take care of itself. Tiku b'chedesh shefer b'keseh. According to Meir Simcha, beautiful. B'keseh liyem chagenu. Zog es nicht areis. Ki chayk li Yisrael hu. It's a chayk for us that this is a mishpat lelekei Yaakov, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu owes us something. We're not coming to demand anything. This is not the avodah of a Yid on Rosh Hashanah. Dvorim nisgovim. I really should be marich a lot, but on the other hand, I don't want to. So I'm going to fear ois with one Meshech Chochmah that I'm sure many of the people here have heard it. It's clear by me, there's many places in Meshech Chochmah, most places he's Makatza. Even in Divrei Musa, Makatza. But here and there, Rav Meir Simcha takes off on the wings of his Eiris when he speaks in Parshas Eikev about how Klal Yisrael went through so much after the Golus of Beis Sheni, and how despondent they were, and how broken they were. Vayinu ketzoyanim, were like nomads going from one land to another, and how the Melech who said that the Meisei Ba'kochva should be nitlik kvura gave us a ruach of tchiyah. Marvelous, just beautiful words, and many, many different places like that, where Meir Simcha for some reason had his Eiris, and he writes, and he opens up the end in the Haftarah of Pekudei, when he writes about David Kadisha, how David HaMelech's Beis HaMikdash is noch do. It was never Chorev because it came from the Emek HaLev of David HaMelech. Shlem HaMelech was the Binyan B'Poil. There's one piece of Meshech Chochmah in Parshas Kisaveh that anyone who reads is Magish. Rav Meir Simcha is reading the story. Is reading the story of his life. It says in the posuk, everyone knows the posuk. Tachas asher lo yavato Hashem lekecha b'simcha b'tuv levav mirev koil v'yavadoto es hayivcha b'motzek u'b'chesek koil. The Gemara says, it says already everything that's terrible. What's the extra b'chesek koil? B'chesek koil means we're missing that thing that's called koil. And what is koil? Das. The Gemara says if a person has No das, never. He could be a multi-billionaire, but if he's a maturif and he's running in the streets without das, his quality of life is negligible. If a person has das, do konis, you have everything. Machasat. That's the word. V'yavadato b'chayse kol. Rav Meir Simcha, I'm going to read a little bit if you don't mind. This is also the pshat in the first pasuk. Tachas asher avadto es Hashem lekecho v'simcha b'tuv levov. Ayid kum Rebbeinu Shalom. It's very nice. My neighbor, he's doing well. Mach feine shidduchim. Everything's going well for him. As a yada in a dachsach of the zweite. He has wealth, so I'm happy that he's davening and he's saying moedim with kavona. My life is a painful life. It's a difficult life. I should be besimcha nechechet. Rav Meir Simcha. You had deis amithius. Just like Benazai was mizbeinin on every beged and every piece of bread that he has, how many thousands of people were involved and how many factories and trucks were needed to get to this beged. Kein sorach ha'odam mizbeinin el chaste ha'beire baruch hu. What a person has to think about. Al hishtalmus hasichli. What we are zeicha to, we're born into a world with monachim sichliyim. Asher kama yegiyas yoga v'chakiris v'nisyenis omal Avram Avinu. How much work of yegiyah, 37 years of relentless hard work Avram Avinu needed to be zeicha to the hakara of Yeseides ha'emunah. Ulahaskel amitas mitzias Hashem yisborach v'yichudei v'ashgechosei v'ashoros ha'nefesh. V'achkach omlu avisakteshim lamed al amitas v'yoga aviseidu v'mitzrayim v'hema kulam. Every one of the mitzvahs is oireis behirim u'mazhirim es ha'nefesh asher b'cholachas mehem yuchel ha'odem lizdabek b'tachzachas ha'amitis v'advekes ha'yachide li'yochid ha'amiti u'ma sheyogu kulam ani moitzi kol elu musukonim lefonai. I'm born in the Tovshim, Nuns, Daleds, Samachs, whatever it is. I come into a world, we have what Avram Avinu gave us, what Yitzchak gave us, what Yaakov gave us, what the Tanoim Akdeshim gave us, what the Amiroim. We have Reb Kiva Eger, a person, I often say this, you say a teretz on Reb Kiva Eger's kasha. Who taught you how to think like that? Reb Kiva Eger taught you. You're using his method. You're the house aggressor. Everything we have is, like we heard before from Rabbi Yankel, alles was wir haben ist von der Größe Bali Moyach Aliki who came before us. Kam tzorich ha'odem anilvov li Somayach u'loheides la'Hashem yisborach ha'tov sheziku l'chol zeh. Look what I have. Look at the incredible fortune that I have. It's free of charge. V'zeh besimcho b'tuv leiv me'roiv koil. Zeh me'roiv ha'deis ha'tzoidkes v'ha'maskiles ha'mashiris b'seichel ha'loiki. Asher zeh yikore ha'ribu mikoil. And then he fears us. Al zeh tzorich ha'odem l'smoyach. Ve'los shevach ve'yidor l'Hashem yisborach me'oimek leiv u'lehisnachim. And with this you can find consolation. Bezeh al kol madvei levovoi hamikrim hameikim loy. The things, the pains and the struggles and the difficulties that he comes across, b'shnois yimei chayev asfurim, in the few years that we have, hamuotim ba'olam hanifsad v'ha'oiva. Rabbi said, one of those oiris mazhirim, without a doubt, is the Sefer HaKodesh Meshech Chochmah. For a few dollars, a person can buy the Sefer and can be zeicha to ha'oyer godel v'otzim. And every week a person says, "Sehr fine, Esther Kugel, Esther Schickel Chicken, lahavdel $11, der Rabbi Shem hat uns gegeben, azah eure Leuki von Rav Meir Simcha. Echod in deures can schreiben a solche Sachen. And we, simple people, have a chaloin to open and to see the Ohr of Rav Meir Simcha and to be nana kafiyah cholteinu. Toivim Ohr Shabora Lekenu, Yitzoram B'das, Bevino B'haskel, Kayach und Gvora, Nosim beim Lies Moishlim Bekerev Tevel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu soll uns Mazake sein, man soll zu Neuf kommen im Yitz Hashem in another 100 years und weiter mitleben der Kayach für Rav Meir Simcha und alle Gedei Yisrael, Omen Ken Yirosem Kolter.